Everyone, my name is Srinivasan Narayan. I am the co-founder and CEO of CohortPlus. First of all, a big thank you to all of you who joined this session. I think it's a lazy Saturday morning, so thanks a lot for getting up early and joining the session. I'm personally very excited because I have with me Lizzie Chapman, the co-founder and CEO of ZestMoney. I know for almost all of you here, ZestMoney as a platform needs no introduction. However, just to complete the formalities, I would spend a few minutes talking about ZestMoney. It is the largest and the fastest growing consumer lending fintech company in India. Congratulations, Lizzie. And the reason it has reached where it has reached is because it is actually kind of targeted a very unique, a very pressing Indian problem, which is around meaningfully improving the lives of more than 300 million households. Yes, you heard it right. 300 million Indian households are kind of improving their lives thanks to the services of ZestMoney, because ZestMoney actually tries to give them tries to give them credit, and these are people who do not have any access to credit cards or other formal financing options because of insufficient credit history. I think that's one part of ZestMoney. But I think the other equally exciting part is that their platform is completely technology driven. I know a lot of my friends who work in ZestMoney, either in the product domain or in the data science domain. I know the great words they speak about the cutting edge technology that ZestMoney is using day in and day out to achieve this noble vision of theirs. They use cutting edge technology including machine learning and AI to enable the instant access of small ticket loans and to try to disburse these loans automatically without no human intervention whatsoever. So that's great, I think. For all those people who are joining here, I also wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about CohortPlus. It is the largest and the fastest growing community for product management and data science professionals. People who are interested in product management, interested in data science, who want to further their careers in this domain, who want to basically interact with like-minded people, exchange useful information, keep themselves abreast with the latest happenings, can actually come here, hang out online, talk to each other, and all of us as a community can take a collective step to kind of build our careers and achieve the next level as far as taking the next step with regards to product management or data science is concerned. Lizzie Chapman is the CEO of ZestMoney, as I said, and I'll just spend a minute talking about her profile, her professional profile. Before ZestMoney, she's been with ZestMoney for what? 3.5 years as the co-founder and CEO. And before that, she worked with Goldman Sachs in London for about 5 years. She became a manager with Welltrust for 3+ years, where she invested in India. I think that was her first trust with India. Yeah, exactly. Right? Fell in love with India, and we can see that. And not just kind of invested in India, but also gave I think she also looked into other financial service companies. And post that, I think in 2011 you moved to India.
Yes, correct.
And that's when you I guess maybe got more involved with the Indian ecosystem at large.
Exactly.
Before starting ZestMoney. Yeah. So I'll hand it over to Lizzie. She'll talk about ZestMoney in more detail. As some exciting nuggets of information that we are going to listen to, and she'll talk about how ZestMoney as a product company is evolving, how ZestMoney is using data and analytics to take the right decisions with regards to disbursement of loans, and then we'll start taking questions one-on-one. The platform is yours, Lizzie.
Oh, thank you. That was an amazing introduction. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here and a bit nervous of talking to such an intelligent audience. Don't often get that opportunity. Spend too much time talking to VCs and people like that. So thank you.
You're being humble, Lizzie.
It's true. It's true. So we are, as you said, we have this grand, audacious goal, which is to make at least 300 million households more creditworthy in this country and beyond. By the way, we have a philosophy that if you could do it in India, you can probably do it anywhere. So that's why we wanted to start here. But it isn't actually that mad when you think about what's happening and the way that financial services are delivered today in this country. It's still a very, very, very physical, paper-based, traditional form of distribution. And that's, frankly, the point to why we believe using technology and using advanced forms of data science and, as you said, machine learning, we can actually not just make a more efficient and better product and platform, but we can actually make a platform that works at a smaller ticket size. So the reason banks don't like lending to the 300 million households that we target is that they don't make money out of it. They don't make significant profit. And you won't be surprised that when a bank finds a potentially profitable customer, they tend to, offer them lots and lots of different products, right? Because it's that classic LTV or lifetime value concept. And what we think is there's, as you said, at least 300 million households who might not be super profitable to a bank, right? They're probably not going to take a home loan and a life insurance and all these other products. But you know what? They certainly earn enough money to afford a small consumption loan, which is what we call the type of lending that we do. And you know what? Even more importantly, they now have even higher levels of aspiration than ever before, because thanks to cheaper, more available data, they're consuming content every single day that's making them realize there's all these amazing products and things out there. Why should a person earning $20,000 a month not have a dream of going on a trip to Thailand, right? That is actually now available to him, and we just make that affordable. Very simple. So we sometimes say we don't think that India needs more credit, it doesn't need more loans, it needs affordability. And all we're doing is using technology and data science to build affordability solutions. Make life more affordable. That's it, basically. So another way to look at it, and I'm going to get a little bit geeky and technical now, but the way that fintech evolved in the world over the last sort of 10, 15 years, we think had like 3 stages, and we sometimes talk about this. Fintech 1.0 was all about new ways of acquiring customers that was going to be cheaper and more effective than a bank could do with a physical branch, okay? So that's like build an app, acquire a customer through the App Store, distribute through Facebook marketing, right? That was kind of Fintech 1.0. And even in India, you've got companies like Bank Bazaar, and a lot of the early stage fintechs were exploiting that dynamic, right? And that's great, that's brilliant. Then in the next phase was like Fintech 2.0, which was all about using data and technology to improve underwriting. So it's like we've solved for acquisition, we can do that better than a bank. Now let's solve for underwriting. Let's make more efficient decisions, more accurate decisions using alternative data and alternative mechanisms of underwriting. And that's when we think the real opportunity took off in India, because if anyone knows, the credit bureaus today cover a very, very small footprint of people. So having the ability to use advanced data and analytics to improve the footprint of credit-worthy people in this country was going to be a massively impactful advancement for fintech in India. And that's when we got excited and, as you said, moved our lives to come and start this business. But what we think now is that there's almost a Fintech 3.0, which only applies to India, and something we're exploiting, which is the 3rd most expensive thing for a bank when it's doing a product or a loan. If number 1 is acquisition and number 2 is underwriting, the 3rd hardest thing for them is what's called servicing or collections, right? All that stuff around, pulling the money on time, sending the statements, calling up the guy to remind him to pay. All of that's really expensive. It has a certain cost. And that's, again, why they don't like to offer those products at a small ticket size, because the cost and profit doesn't work out. So we think that's the point. That's where the technology and data science can have such an amazing impact if you can genuinely create an automated end-to-end platform in lending that works just the way that you're, booking a taxi or ordering your lunch works in a completely digital way, except when it goes wrong and you have to call Swiggy. If in 99% of the cases it happens completely automatically, the costs are so much lower that suddenly you can make a loan work at literally 300 rupees, right? And that's actually the right number for this country. It's not appropriate to tell 1 billion people to take out lakhs and lakhs of credit. That's going to lead to a really bad credit bubble and an economic situation. But if you can make loans that work and add up at 300, 500, 5,000 rupees, that's a killer product. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to solve for all three, right? We're trying to make acquisition more efficient. We're trying to make underwriting better and more accurate so that even people without a credit score can be credit worthy. And then the third piece is we're trying to completely automate the entire end-to-end function of providing a loan, collecting, etc., using technology so that you don't need too many humans and branches. And we think that's the way you can really make something that can reach 300 million people.
Great. So I first heard Lizzie speak a few months back when ZestMoney had an event at Royal Orchid, and I was blown away with that vision. And not just the vision. I mean, having a vision is one part, but how well they have executed on the vision in the past few years, and how well they have actually scaled, or let me call it did scale in the past few years. So I had made up my mind that one day I'll actually call her here. And what I experienced that day, all the community members here should experience. And I'm really thankful again, Lizzie, for actually having you here.
Yes, thank you.
See, I'll actually kind of move into the next kind of section where we have a Q&A, ask you more questions, drill down further on ZestMoney and the objective and the aims and the vision of the company. So Lizzie, clearly going after 300 million households is a humongous task, right? And considering the diversity that India offers, someone who's like a college student, who's like between 18 to 21 years of age, might also be a customer, or someone who's like fresh out of college, 25 years of age, earning anywhere between, let's say, 40,000 to 60,000 a year, a month, sorry, to someone like, let's say, who we call, I would say middle class, or kind of lower middle class. People are also kind of in your bracket, right? And so this segment at one level is a very different segment to run after, vis-a-vis, let's say, someone who's earning 40 to 60,000 but is not like in the 20 to 25 years of age, or maybe in the 30 to 35 years or 40 to 45 years of age. They have different professions and stuff. So two questions on that. One is, in this 300 million household, given the diversity that India offers, which is that particular niche, that you targeted first, because you felt that, hey, what, that entire three things that you told me, acquisition, underwriting, and then disbursement as well as I would say collection of the loans would be the easiest for this particular segment. So let's kind of go after them. Maybe to say that let's turn them as the low hanging fruits, because that will help you get the proof of the pudding before you could kind of maybe once you got the template you could actually replicate it in other segments. So which was that particular segment that you went after first, and why? What gave you the confidence that, hey, what, I should be going after, let's say, the college student population and not after, let's say, some other segment? And
that's a really, really good question, and it's often like the advice you get, right? Like, do one thing really well for one segment. Better to be like 90% market share in one category than be like 10% in 100. And there was a bit of that. Let me explain. And also, by the way, your point about the diversity of India is so spot on, and we should talk about that more, and how therefore we use data science to solve for that in underwriting. That's exactly why we get so excited about building what we do. But you're right, we did on day one have to think, okay, what's the most sensible go-to-market strategy that will allow us both to grow and build a big business, but more importantly learn quickly. And we decided to follow what's called a B2B2C approach. So we said, let's not just put an app in the App Store or a website and let the customers come. Let's start by partnering with a few e-commerce companies. It was in those days we started with electronics e-commerce, because we did a very sort of top-down, very simplistic analysis and worked out, look, there's this many people online, this many people are going to come online, they're going to do that with a smartphone, and you know what? That means this many smartphones are going to get sold in the next so many years. And a lot of the people buying their first smartphone at this time are going to be people that need financing, right? So it's a very simple hypothesis. But we said, let's start with that, and we were very lucky to get on day one of our first e-commerce partners was in the unboxed mobile phone space. And I look back on that, and I think in any sort of vaguely successful startup journey, there's always a few like chance, random, lucky breaks, and I think it's important to acknowledge those. And so we were really lucky with our first partner. I don't think there could have been a better like product market fit, if you think about it, right? So it's unboxed, low-end smartphones, roughly, you know, it wasn't so much of the Apple, more of the kind of mid-priced smartphones, right? Being sold online, and interestingly, this company was very comfortable to go pan-India. They weren't focusing just on Bangalore or Mumbai. They were in a few hundred cities. And so almost immediately from day one, we got some of the most perfect customers who just got it, loved it, needed this product. But we also got some of the most challenging scenarios. How do you collect from a guy in, you know, a tier 3 city in a state that, guess what, banks don't touch, like Assam, right? Some of our first customers were from Assam. Our very first customer was from a very, very, very small town in UP, who probably would not have ever been able to get a credit card from the PIN code that he had. And so it was actually both, you know, really, really hard to think, okay, we have to quickly solve for completely digital collections, completely digital KYC, because we're not going to be able to send a guy up there, but we're going to get the best like feedback and building blocks from these customers. The other thing about these customers, you could describe them as early adopters, because these were people who were definitely looking for financing options, who were focused on affordability, and were already online, right, and tech savvy, right? If a guy is sitting there in UP in this pretty small town, but he's searching on a website for an unboxed smartphone, he's going to be pretty tech savvy. So it gave us a good group of people to get feedback from. And interestingly, these people tended to repeat use the product. So I remember that first guy, he actually used the product. He's been with us for 3.5 years. He's used it 7 times, okay? And that started to happen almost, you know, within month 3. He would come back and buy another product, because he'd say, you know what, I want to buy a phone for my mum now. Let me try again. So we immediately got a deep relationship with these customers. And we would do all that cute stuff. Again, you read about this a lot in like startup books, but we did it. We would send them notes, we would send them thank you letters, we would send them gifts like a charger or a phone case or something if they bought a phone, and we'd say, you know, in return, can you give us feedback? Can you spend time? Can we interview you? And we spent a lot of time in that first 1 year interviewing these guys, getting their feedback, understanding why they used it, like what was the value proposition. And then it was so easy to then sort of sell the value proposition ourselves to the next, you know, 800 partners. We now have 800 e-commerce companies or digital companies that we work with. We still follow mostly a B2B2C model. But if we hadn't had that first year and those initial partners that were so, you know, perfect for us in terms of product market fit, I don't think we'd be here today. I don't think we would have been able to, for example, sell to a Flipkart to get live on their checkout if we hadn't had those learnings from those early customers.
Very interesting. So Lizzie, that gets me to the next question. So once you achieved your, you know, proverbial product market fit, right? The mystery. Let's say that must have happened around 3 years back.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
So a couple of things. One is then how did you decide to, you know, move to the next segment? Which was the next segment you targeted? Second is then it becomes a question of scale, because if you've got the proof of the pudding, then you really need to scale fast, because you need to, you know, kind of you need to convince yourself that this is a growing you know, product, and more importantly, once you actually, you know, kind of get a product market fit, and once you're growing, you need to go fast also, because there are competitors who are lurking around, right? Because at the end of the day, in today's technology world, I mean, there are no moats,
it's hard,
right? So how did that phase happen? And next segment, and then, you know, If you thought of competitive modes, what were they? And most products don't have competitive modes in India. So in that case, how did you actually scale fast and stay and keep yourself ahead of the competition?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And it's actually very unique in a lending business. The answer to that compared to any other digital business. So what happens is once you first start, you do your first few customers, obviously at that point our risk models, our credit models were very rudimentary. We had basically hard-coded them based on a set of assumptions. That's how you normally start a credit model. That we'd learned from other markets. So we'd studied the way these types of products and ticket size loans behave in other markets. And we then made a bunch of kind of rules and assumptions. And then we trained them. You can train your model, right, on a bunch of data points, which we again got some data sets from other markets and started then to feed in the India data that we were getting to train the models. And so what happens in a lending business is you might suddenly think, okay, we've got it. We've got the product market fit. This is working. We know how to do KYC, sign up, whatever. This is working. Oh, but we don't know for another 12 months if the risk model is working. Because even if he repays in month 1 and month 2, guess what? He can also not repay in month 3, 4, 5, right? And that's the really interesting thing about a lending business. You can never relax because you've got a long kind of lifetime of relationship with the customer, and at any point he can stop paying. And so we sometimes joke that a lending business is one of the few products that you sell on day one, and you have no idea if that product sale is going to be really profitable or really loss-making. You don't know with any certainty on day one. So you have to build these models to predict that, basically. And the accuracy of those models cannot be sped up by throwing money at the situation or even throwing volume at the situation, right? So you could say, let's do 10 loans in month 1, 100 in month 2, we'll do 1 million in month 12, and by then we'll have the answer. Because you also have to just go through time, right? You just have to see how those first loans behaved in month 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's a very big challenge actually as an entrepreneur, because when you get that product market fit and you suddenly feel confident of scale, you still need to train your models, and you have to be almost putting your brakes on a bit and making sure that you're balancing your desire for growth with your desire for accuracy in your risk models. And it's a very chicken and egg, because you also need the growth to get the data for the risk models. So I'd say we were pretty slow in the first 1 year. We deliberately went slow. We wanted to train our models to be as good as they could. Some other fintechs in our space decided not to focus so much on the modeling on day one. They said, actually, let's just start with manual underwriting. We'll just have a bunch of analysts doing it the way a bank would, and then we'll automate that later down the line. And we didn't believe that approach would work. We, from day one, wanted to build machine learning automated decisioning in our credit model, because we can talk about why, but we just think that's the whole kind of holy grail of digital lending. So I would say that actually we didn't suddenly kind of rush out and scale. We took our time, and I'm glad we did. We focused on accuracy and automation. So when we work with our credit risk team and our decision scientists, we're not standing there saying, you must get the lowest risk portfolio, we must see 1% NPAs. That's how a bank might think. We're saying we want the most accurate models so that we can predict with very high certainty what the NPAs will be. And we want complete automation, because we don't believe that your decisions will be replicable if they're not automated, right? And now we're at a point where we use tens of thousands of data points on every single borrower to make a decision. And that's the reason you can't follow that manual and then automate model. Because trust me, no human has the computing power to analyze 10,000 data points and make a decision quickly, right? It's just not possible. So from day one, we wanted to invest in that computing power, do things like build our own data lakes, build our own algorithms, and make sure that when the scale came, we were ready and we could handle it. And that's where we are now. So we actually didn't start to scale really quickly until about 18 months, 2 years ago, when we felt really, really confident of the accuracy of the models and the predictability, and then we could go into lots of different markets. And to answer the other part of your question, we also needed, during that first 1 year, when we were building the models, we needed to see diversity at that point. So we needed to quickly add in other categories, other products. We had a challenge in the early days that all the early adopters were male, I hate to say, and you can't build a credit model if it's 100% one gender. So we needed to quickly go into categories where we could get female borrowers. So the second merchant we added was in furniture and like home appliances, not a surprise. So that gave us a good balance. So that's the other thing, again, in a credit risk build out, you need to get as much variety of data as you can to really test your models, because your model could work brilliantly for 25-year-old, college graduates living in Bangalore, but the minute you take it to another city, it can fall apart. So we needed quickly diversity, and that's what we did, and it's worked. Touch wood.
Awesome. So, to all the people who are interested in data science, who are part of the data science community of CohortPlus, I think Lizzie has actually, told you why ZestMoney probably is one of the best companies to work for, if at all you're even remotely interested in the data science domain. Because from whatever I could glean, yeah, I think the company has been data science driven from day one.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there are 3 co-founders, and the 4th person that joined, so the first employee, was actually our head of data science. She's now a chief data officer, and she came from the fintech we worked with in the UK. She's actually Russian, and she's worked in markets all over the world, from North America to Africa to Europe. So she's seen different behaviors, different risk models, and we just knew that we needed that on day one to have that competitive advantage. And I think, so that's the other part of your question, I think that's our biggest moat, is not just the team that we have building the models, but that initial time we took, almost like we were happy to have a slow start to build those models, but now we're reaping the benefits. And it's very hard for a competitor to copy those quickly. It takes time.
So we'll start taking a few questions here. Anirudh asks, how do you attempt a problem? What key factors do you look at first? And what technique do you apply to solve some of the toughest challenges in your day-to-day work?
Brilliant. Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's basically all we do every day, right? Which is solving one of the biggest challenges in the world right now, or in technology, which is underwriting customers who don't have existing, credit footprint. And especially in a market, as you described, as challenging as this, which is as diverse as this. And the thing about India is, it's not just like one population, one country, one dynamic, one behavior set. It's literally hundreds of micro segments of people that both behave differently, have different expectations, need different communication. And so probably the biggest challenge and biggest challenge we have to solve for every day is just the sheer diversity in our underlying user base, right? So the techniques, to answer your question, the techniques we use are basically all around data. We spend our life analyzing, modeling, and understanding data. So to give an example, we have to build what we call ability to pay models within our credit risk decisioning. This is the equivalent of an affordability model, right? How do you work out what is the affordability of this customer? What's the maximum amount he can afford to repay? And therefore, what's the maximum credit limit outstanding? By the way, that's just one of the 8 different models that we have running all the time on a customer. But this affordability model, just to give you a working example, was one of the biggest challenges to build from day one because of the diversity within India. So if you look at the cost of living across the country, you will find that a rental cost or even a transportation cost can be like 5 times different, right? For the same property, the same like 2 BHK in Goa is going to cost completely different to in Bangalore. And so we had to, from day one, start capturing data from lots of alternative data sources to build these affordability models. In any other market or a more kind of Western market, there would just be like one database that you could just, look up. That doesn't exist. So we had to also not just have the hypothesis of how we would build the model, but we then had to go and find unique sources of data that other people maybe didn't have as well, because that's a bit of a moat if you can have unique access to that data, and then start building, testing, and getting feedback loops from the data. So yeah, so I think that's the gist of it. The toughest challenges in our business are almost always solved with data. But I would just add a kind of addendum to that, which is that you can't only look at data without thinking through empirical evidence as well. And so that's why we also spend a lot of time doing customer discovery. We have a thing called Coffee with Customers, when we actually invite customers in to have coffee with us on Saturdays. It's a regular occurrence. And people from not just the product and marketing teams, but also the risk and decision science teams will sit with them, ask questions, and understand things like cost of living, understand, if you're sending money home every month, how do you decide how much to send? All of these kind of dynamics which help us build better models. So we take a mixture of this sort of empirical, like first-hand evidence, and then layer that on top of the data that we're seeing from the data sources and come to hypotheses.
The next question is from Costa Borade, and he asks, what are the best ways to deal with the fragile banking system that exists in India?
That's quite a leading question. I would controversially say that we don't have a fragile banking system. We do have some quite old-fashioned banks. That's obviously a fact. But guess what? So does every single country in the world. I'll tell you that. Banks. The reason fintech is such a huge industry and growing market and producing more unicorns than any other category these days is because of the observation that banking and banking technology was built in the dark ages and it hasn't upgraded because it hasn't needed to. Banks have this sort of regulatory moat, which means they can sometimes be a bit lazy about technology and customer experience. And so all over the world, fintechs are coming along to challenge banks or work with them. And that's what I'd say specifically about India. What's exciting to us and unique, and the reason we love operating in India and not in the US, for example, is that it's not a market where it's a story of bank versus fintech or bank v technology, which is how fintech evolved in some of the other markets. We think in India the banks are actually, they may not be sophisticated in their technology, but they're quite sophisticated in their thinking. And I know this might come as a shock to you, but Indian banks are actually perceived as some of the best banks in the world, and for good reason. They are managed very well. Banks like HDFC, Kotak, they have some of the best management teams in the world, and these are very visionary people. And these people understand that the future is technology, and they also understand that the way to deliver that is to work with fintechs, not against them. They know that they can't build everything. And so actually, the Indian banks are some of the most collaborative that you'll see in the world. Everybody was shocked this week that in the US, Goldman Sachs teamed up with Apple. That was seen as this very revolutionary act that a bank would work with a technology company. But guess what? In India, they've been doing that for the last 5 years. And we have some of these incredibly good and positive partnerships with banks. And they've been very productive, very helpful. We take care of the technology, obviously. They don't, I'm not going to lie, they don't have fantastic tech stacks. When you talk of the API bank, I'm afraid that is a mystical creature. We build the APIs, but their willingness and desire to work with fintech is actually very high. So this is a bit of a drum roll for budding fintech entrepreneurs. India is a great market to be a fintech entrepreneur because of this dynamic. The banks aren't trying to kill you, they're going to try and work with you. And we have a regulator who's incredibly advanced in that thinking. The fact that they came up with even the concept of IMPS and UPI is so groundbreaking and really market leading. And the fact that they could get all the banks on board to support that, that's not happened in any other market. So I'm actually a bit of a fan of Indian banks, and I think that we need to, basically work together to make the best products for the end consumer. Simple.
So this session is not only an illuminating session to understand the fintech landscape in India, but it's also a myth-busting session.
Yeah, literally, right? Would you like write them up?
So the next question comes from Navjot Rajput. He asks, what security measures would you use for storing and securing your product? And says that are you using regular SSL or EDL SSL and any specific reasons around it. I know data privacy and data security is a big issue.
It's a huge issue.
So you can actually push on that.
Yeah, and obviously I can't talk about specifics because especially in security, there are people out there who would love to know exactly what we're doing. But I'll give you a broader picture. Obviously security is one of the most critical and potentially debilitating things that any fintech needs to build and invest in. And especially at the moment when a company like us, we're going through that hyper growth, as you said, and what that means is awareness of ZestMoney is increasing. And that's not just awareness from customers, it's awareness from people who would love to breach your security, right? And for either, you know, financial gain or just to be disruptive. So yes, like all fintech companies, like all tech companies in India today, we face a huge challenge in keeping our systems secure. But again, from day one, we were very aware of that, and so we built, you know, for scale, and we built from day one with pretty good security practices, which just keep improving and improving. So I'd say we're probably at like 4 out of 5 of where we want to be, but the bar will keep raising. So it's going to go to 6, 7, 8 as we get bigger, because you get more violent attacks. We have actually dedicated security team who are incredible. They come from an amazing background of working on huge hyperscale platforms, and they are, I mean, they work night and day, 24/7, and they also employ ethical hackers, which is actually a very common thing now. I think a lot of people are doing this in India, but very powerful. So we have ethical hackers working on our platform all the time that we don't know about, obviously, to identify loopholes and make sure that we're always secure. The way we think about it is a little bit, to think about hacking and security, it's a bit like if you imagine that there's like some sugar in your house and there's some ants looking for it, right? You can keep moving the sugar, you can keep like hiding it and putting more layers of protection, but the ants will just keep coming and finding it, and eventually they will always find it. So you have to constantly be working hard and hard. There's no like, okay, done, we've built our security firewall, brilliant, we're safe. And then the other thing that I think a lot of companies are realizing now in the digital space is, in the security world, a lot of the biggest risks are actually, you know, sitting in your office. And so it's also about training and people and, you know, best practices, like how people access data and access email. And we have obviously huge amounts of confidential user data, so we have to be really, really, really careful about who can ever access that. I, for example, cannot, which is probably a good thing. But it's really on a need-to-know basis, right? Who should ever be able to have access to data and why? And we've built very complex systems around that. The good news is today it's actually much easier than it ever was. Because everything can be cloud-based, everything can be a service, and we're a completely microservices architecture, to get a bit geeky, and that means you can always switch off a service at any point in time. So if you feel that one service is being compromised, you have a much easier, you know, reaction. It's not like in the old days where you'd have to look through a bunch of like logs and servers and work out what's happening. So it is, the technology is there, it's getting easier, but yeah, it's a constant challenge for all fintechs.
The next question is from Siddharth, and I think it's probably, I'm not sure if you guys target SMEs in any way, but I still thought we can take this question.
Good question.
How does the affordability model apply for SME, or the small and medium enterprises or professions like consulting doctors, CAs, etc.?
That's a smart question. We get asked that a lot. Are you only consumer, or do you look at SME?
Sure.
And the point is, in India, as you've highlighted, it's quite complex because it's not black and white. You're not a consumer or an SME. There's a lot of people that fall into that middle zone, who are, whether you call it a sole trader, you know, a freelancer, and as you say, many doctors are in that category. A doctor himself is often an SME. So we do lend to these people, as long as they are happy to sign the loan agreement, or digitally sign the loan agreement, on their name, not in the name of the company. And many of them can, in the examples you put, CAs, doctors. So I think about 30–40% of our customers fall into that category. The affordability model, to your point, is actually even more accurate there, because often we can take into account the cash flows of the business. The challenge with a lot of our more traditional consumers is that a lot of their world is in cash. They'll be spending a lot of their daily spend is in cash, and that's not trackable as easily. Whereas you'll find with, say, a doctor, you're going to be able to see, a lot of the materials that he's purchasing. A lot of his payments are now coming digitally, and so you can actually almost do more accurate affordability models. So we do like that challenge. The bigger challenge we have, which you didn't allude to, but we're working on, is how do you assess the affordability of, say, a housewife, or somebody who's not directly earning, but she could be married to that doctor, and so she has access to those cash flows, but we won't see them, in her digital footprint. So that's a big challenge we want to solve this year, is how do we look at people on a more like holistic sort of household basis. Good,
Awesome.
good question.
Next question is from Sriram, and I'm sorry, from Arun Prakash. He says, could you throw some light on the regulatory requirements in the lending space in India, and the advantages or disadvantages that private lenders like ZestMoney enjoy against banks? One is obviously the technology.
Sure.
I think you spoke about it at length when you gave one of your previous answers. But beyond that, I think regulation is an important aspect when you run a company in the lending space. Could you throw some light on the regulatory aspects or requirements for lending?
Absolutely.
businesses?
Yeah, and again, I'll give you a little bit of a global context, because hopefully a bit more myth busting. This will help you realize how advantageous India is from a regulatory perspective. So it's very folklore for Indian founders to say, oh, the regulator's so difficult, they're so harsh, everything's very difficult. Actually, we have another contrarian view here. The regulator is quite harsh in India, especially in fintech, the RBI, but that's a good thing. So what exists in lots of other markets, especially emerging markets like in Africa and a lot of the rest of Southeast Asia, is the regulator has not made any comment on lending. Lending is actually still a very sort of mum and pop shop, bit grey area. You don't need a license to lend in a lot of markets. Bizarrely, did you know even in the UK up until 5 years ago you didn't need a license to lend? So anyone could just set up a shop and start lending. The lovely thing about India, as bizarre as this sounds, is very black and white. The regulator is not ambiguous. There is no grey area. They are very clear. To lend money in this country, you must be a bank or NBFC. Now, we all know that there are some offline, money lenders, but let's just focus on what are like businesses lending, and you cannot lend unless you have that license as bank or NBFC. So that makes it really simple as a fintech. You basically have to decide on day one, do I want to get that license? Sorry, bank license, not easy. NBFC license, possible. So you can decide, shall I apply for an NBFC license? Or shall I follow the model we did as ZestMoney, which is that collaboration model? Shall I design a platform and a set of technology that's so appealing to a bank or NBFC that then I can create a partnership and they'll work with me and we'll basically split the economics? Another way to think about it, and this is how we sometimes describe it, is look at some of the best businesses that have scaled well in this country in the digital space in recent years, whether it's Oyo, whether it's Swiggy, whether it's Ola, right? They didn't build the underlying sort of infrastructure from day one. What they started with was aggregating the existing supply. So sure, now Swiggy have the bowl company, but on day one, they only had existing, biryani shops or kati roll providers. They didn't need to build that. Similarly with Oyo, right? They tied up with a bunch of existing guest houses. Later down the line, they've built some of these townhouses. You can do that. But on day one, we think one of the clever things to do in a market this big is to actually aggregate the existing supply. So on the NBFC side in India, did you know, there are nearly 20,000 licensed NBFCs. And many of them are very small, very subscale. Obviously, a lot of them have no technology. And so we actually saw that as an opportunity. Why don't we make one of our unique selling points, our ability to work with existing NBFCs, provide the technology for them, because they're never going to be able to build at the level we can, and create win-win partnerships. And so that makes life quite simple for us from a regulatory perspective. All the loans that go through ZestMoney are completely regulated. They all eventually sit on the book of a licensed NBFC. There's no ambiguity. And then that means things like KYC, collections regulation, is very black and white. There are clear guidelines that we're given, and we just design all of our processes around those guidelines. And we like that. We think that actually, sort of grey areas and exploiting loopholes in regulation is a very short-term strategy in any business. And there's something quite nice about having the clarity and then being able to go to the regulator and, clarify any questions that you have. It creates a much more sort of level playing field. And I'll just add a footnote there, it makes investors more relaxed. Because you'll find in markets where there's no regulation, investors will give a big haircut because there's always a risk that overnight the regulator could wake up and shut down the whole industry. And that's very unlikely in India now. We have quite a clear kind of framework.
That's awesome. And I'll actually take a moment here and abstract one of the biggest learnings that Lizzie gave as part of this answer. So as Lizzie said, as a tech player in India, you don't have to become a full stack player from day one.
Yes, exactly.
What you need to do as a consumer internet player or a B2B2C player is, you need to crack product distribution first.
I agree.
And in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lizzie, whichever company cracks product distribution in his or her domain is going to be the eventual winner. So you crack product distribution first. So like, and this is for all the product guys out there. Swiggy cracked product distribution as far as, delivering food was concerned.
Brilliantly.
Right? Brilliantly.
Brilliant. And they put all their energy, their resource, their bandwidth into that. Imagine if they'd had to go and build a kitchen as well. It would like suck up a lot of your energies, right? Exactly.
They cracked product distribution as far as delivery of food was concerned, right? Oyo cracked product distribution as far as accommodation was concerned, right? They didn't go out and build townhouses from day one. But once they had all the users hanging out on Oyo, once we had all the users hanging out on Swiggy, that's when they decided that, hey, you know what? Now we've actually cracked the demand side at one end and the supply side at the other end. Now we can actually plug in our own, kitchens, which is like the Swiggy
bowl
kitchens,
company or whatever. Yeah, exactly. And that's right.
And which is what Oyo did with Townhouse. So I think in my mind that's how ZestMoney also
we agree with that. Exactly.
Took that approach,
it's classic sort of business studies, right? There's supply, there's demand. You can choose on day one to aggregate supply and aggregate demand, right? And which is more important. And you're right. We thought, the most important thing we needed to get right was building the best product, the best platform, and the best underwriting. And would having our own balance sheet have sped up any of that? Actually, no. So we took that decision. And now we're very, very, very grateful for it, because we're able to scale faster than the fintechs that had put the MBFC on. They're slowed down because there's a lot more, sort of regulation and admin that they have to do. And then things like, there was a sort of mini liquidity crisis last year, and it meant that smaller MBFCs couldn't actually raise capital from banks at that time. But we were fine because we had small, medium, and large MBFCs to work with. So, imagine like if Swiggy had only their own kitchens and then there was a food inspection and they got shut down. That would be a pretty game over scenario. So again, having that diversity means that they can always meet demand. And that's the other thing when you're operating in a market like India, where the demand is potentially quite vast. You need to build your redundancy in the demand side, the supply side.
So maybe Swiggy's ultimate vision is to have more kitchens or build the biggest kitchen in the world. Oyo's ultimate vision could be become the biggest real estate player in the world. But that's not how they started. And I sincerely hope that ZestMoney becomes the biggest money bank in the world, right? So but you don't have to become a bank on day one.
Exactly.
What you need to ensure is that people who need banking services get them through you. And then you can probably, kind of take one step towards your ultimate vision.
Brilliant. Well put. I like that.
The next question is from, Sriram, and he asks, could you please let us know some of the options that ZestMoney uses to evaluate, the user experience?
Wow, that's a good one. Oh, great. Okay, user experience. I mean, honestly, the number one thing you use to evaluate user experience is users, right? So user feedback. So we use a bunch of, obviously, technology to track the customer through his journey, and that gives you great quantitative data in terms of drop-off or where he's having pain points, where it's taking time to complete. We obviously measure the time outs on every single stage of the product flow and every action that he has to do. But then we also do a lot of more sort of qualitative user feedback. So as an example, from day one, we measured Net Promoter Score. By the way, no metric when measuring user experience is perfect. There's positives and negatives in every single one. So you can easily shoot down anybody that is obsessed with one metric. You need to look at a lot of metrics to understand user experience. But we do like Net Promoter Score because it's very simple, it's very crude. Almost everybody will respond. If you just ask someone, would you recommend this to your friend on a rate of 1 to 10? That's not taking up too much of their time, it's not a burden for the customer, versus a long questionnaire where only a small set of people will ever give you that feedback. And what we do with Net Promoter Score is we don't just ask it one time at the time when we've given him the money, because guess what? You always get a good Net Promoter Score when you give people money. We ask it through the life of the customer. So when they're uploading their KYC, we would ask them. When they're getting the money, fine. But more importantly, when they're repaying every month. So even in the middle of the month, we might ask them, would you recommend ZestMoney? When you've done your UPI repayment at the end of the month, would you recommend ZestMoney? And that gives us a much more real understanding of which bits they love and which bits they hate. If it turns out that we always get a bad score on the day that we send the statement's probably not working, right? So we're very obsessive with that. We also just track it, over time, and we look at if we made a change to the product, what did that cause? What reaction did we get in Net Promoter Score? So I think that's a really useful one. And then again, back to the earlier point about not getting only obsessed with the metrics, you've also got to use empirical evidence and layer that on top. So spending time interviewing customers, and another kind of unique thing I think that we do, making our team, especially our product and technology team, making them talk to customers. And we actually make customer service mandatory in our company. So most, even engineers have done a day on the phones talking to customers, because we think that is genuinely the best way to evaluate the user experience. What are the problems the customer is facing? Why is he having to call up? To me, that's a clear fail of the technology. And so we find that when we get the product and tech guys doing a day on customer service, about 200 million brilliant user experience ideas follow very, very quickly. So the best way to evaluate user experience is to talk to users. And the final point on that is to be a user. I don't believe that you can be a founder of a company or a product manager in a company and not be a very, very frequent user of that product, because that is the best way to really empathize with your customer. And so I am obviously one of our biggest, most passionate and also most angry users when anything ever goes wrong.
So one of my mentors gave me the biggest advice, or I would say the most valuable advice. He said, if you don't eat your own dog food, your product is not going to succeed.
Exactly. We have a, when we launch something new, we have a thing we call dog fooding in the company, where we make everybody test it out before we launch it to the customer. Yeah.
So any question I have on product management, data science, the first thing I do is I post it on CohortPlus.
Yes, we'll do that now as well.
So Ayush Bafna asks, what's your customer acquisition strategy? Is it completely digital, or is it offline plus online? And do you have on-ground affiliate partners or agent networks? Wow. And how crucial or non-crucial is it with regards to your Indian business?
Brilliant. Very good question. Wow, we haven't touched on acquisition. Okay, so very quickly, because I know we're also running out of time. We do today 99% digital online customer acquisition. And that's because we're still following a predominantly B2B2C model. The main use case for ZestMoney EMI is online, either on a education site, travel site, e-commerce site, etc. So by definition, our customers are already digital, they have a digital footprint, and they're happy shopping online. But we use a variety of different types of acquisition strategies. And that includes, even things like we work with influencers on YouTube, people who review products. Let's say the guys that are reviewing a new handset device. We will have them mention ZestMoney in that review, for example. So we do a lot of very clever, new age sort of influencer style acquisition. So what we don't do is things like Google AdWords. Very minimal performance marketing, because that's become very expensive and inefficient, we believe, these days. So we use a lot of different kind of diverse techniques. Luckily, our number one acquisition strategy is organic. More than 60-70% of customers just come organically because they heard of the product from a friend or something like that. And that's obviously the nirvana of acquisition. We are going to start this year going above the line or offline. What we will never do is what you mentioned, which is things like agent, network, affiliate. We don't want to work with physical human beings because, as we said at the beginning, we want a completely digital end-to-end process. But you will start seeing ZestMoney in physical stores very soon. We're already in the Me Home stores. And it's a completely digital process, completely online. But you will see branding in the stores to encourage you to use ZestMoney. And that's something that works really, really well for us. And you'll see a lot more of that this year. Yeah.
Awesome. Moving on to the next set of questions. So Vishal Sanghi asks, how do you manage and mitigate your risk across customer demographics, merchants, categories? And the related question there is, how do you ensure that your users actually pay up on time?
Yeah, the $1,000,000 question. Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to take 10 hours to answer that completely, but the super high level answer is with data, right? With a completely obsessively data-based approach to. Okay, so let me just again give you a sort of framework for how we think about risk and managing risk in India. We think there are 3 pillars. Again, there's always 3 of I think, but 3 pillars. One is source the best customers. Okay, so make sure that you are working with the e-commerce companies closely, that you're not just finding customers, in the Google Play Store only or through Google Ads, because they might not be the best quality customers. They might be more fraudsters or people that have an intent to not pay. So that's pillar 1. Make sure you're using acquisition strategies that get you access to quality customers, or genuine customers, put it like that. Pillar 2 is to have the best underwriting models, and I think we talked about that at the beginning, but how do you have an advantage in underwriting in India? It takes time and it takes data. And it also takes some amount of pain, you have to go through a few losses to be able to train your models. And we've done that, and now we're very confident of the accuracy of our models, but that's the key critical pillar 2. And then pillar 3, which is the more explicit answer to how do you get your money back, is you have to have really, really good collections practices and good operating systems. And that's not, by the way, just like feet on street or people phoning up. We have actually very little of that. We have no feet on street, and we just have a couple of guys that do phone calls. We think that's where the technology and data, again, can be your advantage. So we have a completely automated approach to collections. First of all, that means enabling every type of repayment mechanism, everything except checks. We don't like them, and nor do our customers. So we work with every single payment provider. We enable NASH, eNACH, standing instruction, direct debit, net banking, credit card, debit card, wallet, UPI, anything you can imagine, so that it's the easiest possible way for a customer to repay. And then we have a completely automated approach to how we remind, message, target, and educate. We actually think almost the way a digital company would think about its marketing acquisition channel, we think the same about the collections channel. So we think it's our job every month to get back this much money, and we need to create almost like a funnel to get that money back. And that's a lot of retargeting. If a customer needs to be reminded 20 times versus 1 time, you might even find some customers don't want to be reminded at all. All of that logic we've built, and again, it's all down to data and AI and advanced modeling, which just takes time, to build.
So, Lizzie, because you're talking about data, AI modeling, and the kind of features that you're building unique to ZestMoney, I also wanted to kind of take a moment out here, and if you could address our community members here, and most of them are either product managers or data scientists, on the unique features from a product perspective, or the unique challenges from a data or a AI perspective, that ZestMoney faces, not just day in and day out, but things that we plan to do in the data science domain and in the product domain in the coming 1.5 years. Because I also know that a good proportion of users here aspire to work in ZestMoney, because we've got a lot of questions around that, and I want to collate all those questions together and kind of do it at once, so that all the job aspirants seeking a role in ZestMoney,
what would you be doing?
What would they be doing? Why should they join ZestMoney? And stuff. And if you can kind of address all those questions at one go, I think that would be really useful to at least the job seeking portion of people who are hanging out today with us.
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I hope you've seen from what we've talked about today that there's almost nothing in our entire business that we don't try and solve with data and technology. In fact, if there was a product feature or a channel that we were going to go into and we couldn't solve for that with a completely automated data-driven approach, we wouldn't do it. And that's, for example, why people have said to us for 3 years, why are you not in this physical store? Why are you not in this physical store? And we said it's not priority because we don't think we can do it in that store without a human. We want to do it with data and technology. And so we are solving problems from literally the marketing to communications to underwriting to operations to collections, every single piece of the value chain, that full stack, using only data and technology. And that means that we have a huge data science team. It's about 20 people today, considering the size of the business, and a very large product team. It's nearly 10 people, and they work very, very closely across the entire business. So there isn't like one problem that they solve. They solve everything. There's nothing that they don't. And they also work very autonomously. So we have what we call a pod structure, which is we've created different pods who are almost like little businesses within a business, staffed with product, tech, data science, and they go deep into a domain. So that example, how do we get the money back? How do we make the best possible collections that is the most awesome experience and the most accurate and efficient technology to get the money back? That is a pod. And there are experts in there who spend their life studying like the UPI frameworks and so on and so on, and working together to create the best possible repayment pod. And by the way, the people move between the pods. We don't make someone just do like UPI for 3 years or they go mad. We circulate them, so that's important. So some of the unique and new things we're going to be solving for this year are things that we don't think anybody has ever done in this market. One example is what we call risk-based pricing. So we believe that there shouldn't be a sort of subsidy model in credit. It shouldn't be that the least risky people subsidize the most risky people. That is undemocratic, it's not fair. We think these 0% schemes are a little bit misleading, and again, it often ends up that the riskier people are basically suffering or struggling, and the least risky people get, no pricing. So we're working on really advanced pricing algorithms that will mean that we match the risk of the customer to the price that they pay for the credit and for the services. And that's something that very few people in the market are doing today. Linked to that, we're also building a very advanced recommendation engine. What we've learned is that a customer who uses ZestMoney, say on a mobile phone, guess what, has other products in his life that he wants to buy over the next 1 year. And they might even be things he didn't know that he could afford or that were available. And so we've built a pretty cool MVP, I would say, but it's getting better and better, of a recommendation engine, which basically means that if you bought a new phone, in January, we wouldn't even mention or show you mobile phones for at least 3 months, because that's just spam, that's annoying. But we might show you a new exciting launch from Xiaomi, because you obviously like Xiaomi, because you bought your phone from them, in the bike space, for example. So recommending products that you might love based on your previous purchases. So that's a big project that we're building at the moment with our data and AI team. And then another really exciting one that I don't think anyone has solved yet in this market is how do you take the ZestMoney experience into the physical world, but retaining that completely digital and automated experience. And we have a pretty amazing idea of how to do that, but it's top secret. And we have a team of people working on that, and it involves not just things like payments infrastructure. It also involves things like facial recognition. We're going to be one of the first in the market to have a facial recognition in a physical store to authenticate a customer. And we have a team of people. It's actually a company that we bought called Photograph AI, who are experts in that type of AI or visual AI, facial recognition, who are working on that right now, and that's really exciting. Oh, and one final one, I just remembered, voice. We also think that voice is going to be a very, very exciting part of our product this year. Again, it's a brilliant authentication tool. You can really understand who somebody is by the patterns in their voice, and that's very important in a lending product, but it's also the best way to navigate a complicated product. If a customer can just speak into a device, we can then translate that and make sure that they get the product and experience that they need. So those are just some of the things we're working on.
These are super exciting. So we talk of ML, we talk of AI, we talk of face recognition, and we've spoken about voice. These are nothing but the pillars on which the future of India, the future of India would be built. These are the pillars on which everybody feels consumers would be moving to in the near future. And ZestMoney is already kind of at the vanguard of that movement.
Yes. Come and join us.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, because there were a lot of questions from people around, how ZestMoney is from a pure work perspective. I thought I should actually ask this from the and get the answer from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, and it's a nice place to work. So check out our Glassdoor reviews. You'll see that it's a really nice culture.
For all those people who are looking for a job transition and have ZestMoney in that money, I think you've got the answer from the horse's mouth. So thanks a lot, Lizzie.
Thank you.
I think we have kind of run out of time. It's already 7 minutes late. Do you want to take a couple of more questions, Lizzie?
I don't mind. Sure.
Okay. So there's one by Poonam. She asks, how is ZestMoney doing the KYC after changing the RBI, after the changes in RBI guidelines of not having the Aadhaar mandatory in terms of the digital experience for the customer? And what is the minimum time in which the consumer can get the personal loan from ZestMoney?
Sure. So just quickly on KYC. We, by the way, never made Aadhaar mandatory. We always made it optional. There were some challenges even in the eKYC user experience. Some of you will know if you've worked in that space as product managers. For example, if the customer's mobile phone was not updated in the UID database, then the OTP would fail. And so it was never a perfect solution. I think that's really important to say. And so most fintechs that were operating in KYC had to have many other versions of KYC. I think we have about 5 different versions of KYC, and we match the right KYC to the right customer. We do physical if we need to, but it's in a very small minority of cases. It would be because of a ticket size or some reason why the customer couldn't do a digital KYC, but we prefer a digital method. And then we have various different digital methods, including video, facial recognition, etc., etc. So I'd just say, big picture, we've always had to operate under the assumption that eKYC was not the only type of KYC, and I think that's really important. I think anyone that's serious about fintech, you have to look at the long game, and you have to realize that one method won't work forever for everyone. Although we're very positive that eKYC is going to be coming back in the next few months, fingers crossed. And then you asked about personal loan. We do now offer a personal loan to ZestMoney customers, but as you realized, it's only for customers who have been on the EMI for a few months. We don't have a strict rule about that. It's actually part of our machine learning, so it will be different for every customer. So you might be offered a personal loan after 2 months because our risk models suggest that you are able to service that loan. Another customer, it might take 1 year, and it completely depends, and it changes over time. That's actually a very explicit example of how our models work. They adjust depending on the data that we see and things like behavioral data. So if we discover that you've been applying for lots of different loans across different fintechs, then that offer of a personal loan from ZestMoney might go away because we don't want to over leverage the customer. To give you an example.
So we've really kind of run out of time. We are 10 minutes over the deadline. So I want to thank everyone who's joined this session. It's been really illuminating and myth-busting. I walk back I consider myself to be a fintech illiterate person. But now at the end of the session, I definitely walk back a slightly more enlightened man as far as the fintech space in India at large is concerned, and as far as ZestMoney in particular is concerned. The work that you and your team have done, Lizzie, over the last 3-4 years. I just got inspired when I attended your session at Royal Orchid, and today it has been awe-inspiring. Knowing more about ZestMoney and the kind of vision that you're going after. And more importantly, whatever you have executed in this short period of 3 to 4 years towards kind of taking large strides towards achieving that vision. I know not everything has been achieved, but whatever you guys have achieved, I think it's awe-inspiring and it's like a trendsetter for a lot of companies. Not just in the fintech domain, but generally startups at large. And more importantly, the kind of information you gave us today, small nuggets of information, not just around how ZestMoney acquires their customers, how you evaluate your customers, but also around other players like the government who are not necessarily impediments, but are actually catalysts for change. Most people who are laymen or who are not in the system, they have a very different opinion. But once you get into the system, I think all these myths get busted. So I think that to me was also kind of pretty illuminating. So
Thank you.
I think it's been a really good session
Thanks
for all of us, and I'm sure that every person here who's been hanging out on a live session walks back a little more knowledgeable.
Good. Good.
Having more information about fintech at large, and getting inspired by whatever ZestMoney has done in this short time of 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, cool.
Last words, Lizzie, from you.
No, thank you so much. I've been amazed by the quality of questions, the depth of understanding of what we do. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And please be in touch. Either contact us on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, we're everywhere. And if you're interested in a role and interested in contributing, we are growing quickly. We're hiring lots of people at the moment, so just drop a line to careers@zestmoney.in.
Awesome. And for all those, most of you will be part of CohortPlus, but in case you aren't, do join our platform at CohortPlus.com, or it's the top app as far as product management or data science is concerned on the Play Store. So type data science or product management and we will be on the top apps. Register that. Find the best product managers, find the best data scientists, find people of your domain who are part of your profession, hang out with them, ask the best questions, keep yourself abreast with the latest happenings either in product management or in data science. And for all such more such events, check out CohortPlus.com. We assure you that we have more such events lined up which are equally exciting as this event was. Thank you one and all.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.